Radio in the 1960s wasn't just entertainment, it was a battlefield. Stations across America and Britain were pulling records off the air, government agencies were opening investigations, and broadcasters were drawing lines that musicians kept crossing. Some bands were absurd, some were genuinely alarming to the people in charge, and some only made the songs more legendary. These are the 20 most brutal 60s songs that got banned from radio. Number 20. Monster Mash by Bobby Boris Pickett. It seems almost impossible to believe that a Halloween novelty song could be considered dangerous enough for a radio ban, but the BBC pulled it in 1962 without hesitation. Bobby Pickett and the Crypt Kickers released it in October of that year, and it went straight to number 1 in the United States. The BBC, however, refused to play it at all, deeming it, in their own words, too morbid. That ruling stayed in place for over a decade. The BBC didn't lift the ban until 1973, making it one of the longest-running music bans in the corporation's history. The irony is that the song is almost aggressively cheerful, a campy novelty track with nothing genuinely dark about it. But the BBC of the early 1960s was a very particular institution, and a song built around dancing monsters and graveyards was more than they were willing to put on the air. Number 19. Universal Soldier by Donovan.
He's on 31 and he's only 17.
Donovan released this anti-war song in 1965, and it ran into resistance from radio programmers on both sides of the Atlantic. The song, originally written by Canadian folk singer Buffy Sainte-Marie, was a pointed indictment of individual complicity in warfare, uncomfortable enough for stations in a year when American combat troops were being deployed to Vietnam in growing numbers.
He's the universal soldier, and he really is.
Several American stations refused to play it outright, viewing it as unpatriotic. The BBC placed it on a restricted list, meaning it could not be used in general entertainment programming. Donovan was 20 years old when he recorded it. The controversy around the song, rather than silencing it, helped define the emerging folk protest movement of the mid-decade.
Orders come from far away no more.
Number 18. Brown-Eyed Girl by Van Morrison. Van Morrison's 1967 single ran into trouble at multiple American radio stations, primarily because the original version contained a line referencing making love in the grass. The line was altered before commercial release, but even the cleaned-up version faced resistance from stations uncomfortable with its general tone. There was also a separate layer of tension surrounding the song's conception. Morrison had originally conceived it with a title referencing a woman of a different race, and the implication of an interracial relationship, even after changes were made several stations reluctant to broadcast it in the summer of 1967. That same summer, the Supreme Court had just issued its landmark ruling in Loving versus Virginia, making anti-miscegenation laws unconstitutional nationwide. For some Southern stations, that was enough context to keep the record off the air entirely. Number 17. The House of the Rising Sun by The Animals. The Animals' 1964 recording of this traditional song became one of the first records of the British invasion to reach number 1 on both sides of the Atlantic. But its subject matter, the story of a life destroyed in a New Orleans house universally understood as a brothel, made it untouchable at a number of American radio stations, particularly in more conservative markets. The song made no effort to soften its subject. It was a direct, unsparing account of ruin, and several programmers decided their audiences weren't ready for that kind of bluntness coming out of the speakers during afternoon drive time. Despite the bans, it still climbed to the top of the charts, proof that the audience had a very different view of what they could handle. Number 16. Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite by The Beatles.
Celebrated Mr. K performs his feat on Saturday.
This track from Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, released in 1967, was flagged by the BBC for a suspected drug reference. The phrase, "Henry the Horse," a character in the song's circus-themed lyrics, was interpreted as slang for heroin. Lennon had written the song by essentially transcribing the text of an 1843 circus poster he purchased at an antique shop, with no such intent.
The Hendersons will dance and sing as Mr. Kite flies through the ring.
The BBC's reasoning illustrated how broadly the net of suspicion was being cast in that period. Almost any unusual phrase, any slightly surreal image, was being read through the lens of drug culture by broadcasters determined to find hidden meanings. The song was restricted from general BBC programming as a result, part of the same wave of suspicion that swept across much of the Sgt. Pepper album.
The celebrated Mr. K performs his feat on Saturday.
Number 15. Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones' breakthrough, American hit of 1965, faced resistance from the BBC and from several American stations for its blunt, sexually suggestive tone. The BBC placed it on a restricted list, and a number of U.S. stations also refused to play it, though American resistance was patchier. The band did nothing. The record went to number 1 in the United States in June 1965 and stayed there for 4 weeks. It also reached number 1 in Canada, Australia, and the Netherlands. It was the song that turned the Rolling Stones from a promising British band into a global phenomenon, and no amount of broadcaster reluctance was going to stop that. Number 14. Gloria by the Shadows of Night. The Shadows of Night were a Chicago garage rock band whose 1966 cover of Van Morrison and Them's Gloria ran immediately into trouble with American radio programmers. The original version was considered too sexually suggestive, and the band was pressured to alter the lyrics before most stations would play it. The edited version went on to reach number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the spring of 1966. But many stations still refused to play even the cleaned-up recording, and the unedited original was effectively off-limits on mainstream American radio entirely. The song's frank framing of desire had no place on most program directors' playlists, regardless of how many words were changed. Number 13. My Generation by The Who. The Who's 1965 single was banned by the BBC almost immediately after its release, but not for the reason most people would expect. The song's rebellious content, its direct challenge to the older generation, was not the stated problem. The BBC's objection was that Roger Daltrey's distinctive stuttering vocal delivery might be considered offensive to people with speech impediments. The ban was lifted once the song became a massive hit, and the BBC could no longer justify keeping it off the air. It reached number 2 on the UK charts in November 1965. Looking back, the stated reason for the ban reads as the kind of justification authorities reach for when the real issue is that a song feels threatening in ways that are harder to articulate directly. Number 12. I Feel Like I'm Fixin' to Die Rag by Country Joe and the Fish.
1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give.
Country Joe McDonald wrote this anti-Vietnam War song in 1965, and it circulated in Bay Area counterculture circles before receiving a wider release in 1967 on the band's second album. The BBC restricted it, and American radio stations largely refused to play it, finding its satirical anti-war content too politically charged for general programming, at a time when criticism of the war effort was being treated in many quarters as disloyalty.
5, 6, 7, open up the pearly gates.
The song became widely known only after Country Joe performed a solo version at Woodstock in August 1969, famously preceded by a crowd call and response that left no ambiguity about the recording's relationship to broadcast standards. The Woodstock performance, captured in the concert film, gave it an audience of millions in ways radio never would have permitted.
1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for? Don't ask me, I don't give.
Number 11. Society's Child by Janice Ian.
She says I can't see you anymore.
Janice Ian wrote this song when she was 13 years old. She recorded it at 14. It tells the story of a young white girl whose relationship with a black classmate is ended by the pressure of her mother's disapproval, her classmates' taunting, and her own eventual surrender to social expectation. Atlantic Records, which had financed the original recording, refused to release it. Ian took it to Verve Records, who were barely more enthusiastic. When it was finally released in 1966 and more broadly in 1967, radio stations across the American South refused to play it. Some gave the reason plainly: the interracial subject matter. Others claimed the singer was too young to be addressing such topics. National exposure came only after Leonard Bernstein featured it on a CBS television special in April 1967, and publicly praised it in terms that made programmers feel embarrassed for having ignored it. Even then, it stalled at number 14 on the charts, held back by continued resistance in key markets. Ian later said she received death threats over the song. She was 17 years old at the time. It was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2001.
She says I can't see you anymore.
Number 10. Eve of Destruction by Barry Maguire. Few songs from the 1960s attracted the kind of coordinated institutional hostility that met Eve of Destruction when it was released in 1965. Written by 19-year-old P.F. Sloan, it touched every nerve of its era at once: the Vietnam War, the draft, the civil rights movement, the nuclear threat, and the hypocrisy of American society. It was recorded in a single take, with Maguire reading the lyrics off a crumpled piece of paper. A BC radio banned the record across its entire network. Stations in Chicago, Washington, Baltimore, and Memphis refused to play it, with some programmers publicly calling it leftist propaganda. The BBC placed it on its restricted list. Some stations called it an aid to the enemy in Vietnam. Despite all of that, or because of it, the song went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in September 1965, and it reached the top 10 across multiple countries. The media attention generated by the bans was enormous. A conservative folk group called The Spokesman recorded a direct answer song titled The Dawn of Correction, within days of Eve of Destruction hitting the charts, which only drew more attention to the original. It was Maguire's only top 40 hit. The controversy effectively finished him as a mainstream recording artist. Number 9. God Only Knows by the Beach Boys.
God only knows what I'd do without you.
The Beach Boys released this song in June 1966 on their Pet Sounds album, and many American radio stations refused to play it, not because of any suggestive content, but because of a single word in the title. The word God, appearing in the title of a rock song, was considered blasphemous by a number of programmers, who felt it had no place in secular popular music. The irony is that the song is one of the most genuinely reverent pieces of music the 1960s produced. It reached number 2 in the United Kingdom, where the BBC had no issue with it. In the United States, it stalled at number 39, with station resistance playing a significant role. It has appeared on countless best-of-all-time lists in the decades since.
God only knows what I'd do without you.
Number 8. Let's Spend the Night Together by the Rolling Stones. When the Rolling Stones appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in January 1967, they were given an ultimatum: change the lyric or don't perform. Sullivan's producers would not allow the title phrase to go out over the air. Mick Jagger complied, substituting the word time for night, and performed the altered version with undisguised contempt, rolling his eyes each time he sang the changed word. The moment became one of the most memorable acts of passive resistance in television history. Beyond the Sullivan incident, The song was banned or restricted by radio stations across the United States for its barely concealed sexual invitation, and the BBC restricted it in the UK as well. The band's label released it as a double A-side with Ruby Tuesday, which helped ensure commercial success even when individual stations refused to play the intended lead single. Number 7. Back in the U.S.S.R. by the Beatles.
Back in the U.S.S.R.
The Beatles opened their White Album in November 1968 with this Chuck Berry-influenced rocker, and the BBC promptly banned it on the grounds of its perceived pro-Soviet sentiment. The song's framing, a traveler expressing joy at returning home to the Soviet Union, was enough for BBC programmers to determine the content was inappropriate for British broadcasting during the Cold War. The Beatles had no real agenda with the song. It was a playful parody of American road songs, specifically the back-home genre that Berry and the Beach Boys had made their own. The BBC was not in the mood for the joke. The ban was a telling measure of just how politically charged the late 1960s broadcasting environment had become.
Back in the U.S.S.R.
Number 6. Louie, Louie by the Kingsmen. No story in the history of radio censorship is quite like the story of Louie, Louie. The Kingsmen recorded the song in 1963 in a single low-budget session. The singer stood at a microphone positioned too high, leaned back to reach it, and the resulting vocals were so slurred and indistinct that almost nothing could be clearly understood. What parents and radio programmers imagined they heard in the gap between expectation and audibility was far worse than anything actually on the record. A rumor spread that the lyrics were pornographic. The governor of Indiana banned the song statewide. The FCC opened a formal investigation. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, launched its own inquiry in February 1964, sending agents to question the band members. At the end of it, the FBI laboratory declared the lyrics officially unintelligible and found no evidence of obscenity. The song was a Caribbean-inflected love song about a sailor missing his girlfriend. Nobody noticed that the band's drummer had actually yelled a genuine obscenity at a quiet moment in the recording, which the investigators never picked up on either. The whole episode is a monument to moral panic. An entire government apparatus mobilized against a song that turned out to be completely innocent, while the actual obscenity hiding in plain sight went undetected for years. Number 5. I Am the Walrus by the Beatles. The BBC banned this song in November 1967, shortly after its release as the B-side to Hello Goodbye. The stated reason was a single word, knickers, appearing in a set of surrealist, deliberately nonsensical lyrics that Lennon had written across 2 sessions. The BBC determined that this reference to women's underwear was too racy for broadcast. Lennon had written the song in part as a deliberate provocation, a response to learning that a teacher at his old school was instructing students to analyze Beatles lyrics for hidden meaning. The song was built specifically to resist analysis, stuffed with absurdist imagery and circular non sequiturs. The BBC's decision to ban it over the word knickers confirmed that the censors were listening exactly as literally as the teacher Lennon had been mocking. Number 4. Je t'aime, moi non plus by Serge Gainsbourg and Jane Birkin. When this record was released in 1969, radio stations in Britain, the United States, Italy, Spain, and several other countries either banned it outright or refused to play it in any form. The BBC banned it completely. The reason was unmistakable. The song contained the sounds of a couple in an intimate moment, recorded with no effort to disguise what was happening. Gainsbourg had originally recorded the song in 1967 with Brigitte Bardot, but she asked him not to release it, concerned about her public image. He re-recorded it with Jane Birkin in 1969. Despite the bans, and directly because of the attention they generated, the record reached number 1 in the United Kingdom, becoming the first French-language single to top the UK charts. It remains one of the most discussed and most banned recordings of the entire decade. Number 3. Street Fighting Man by the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones released this song in August 1968, and it was immediately banned in Chicago and several other American cities. The timing was impossible to ignore. The song arrived within days of the violent clashes between protesters and police outside the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Local officials, already on edge after one of the most chaotic political events in recent American history, were not about to allow a song about street-level political confrontation onto the radio. Stations across the country pulled it. The BBC restricted it. The concern wasn't just the lyrical content, it was the moment the song arrived in. The country felt like it was at a breaking point, and programmers and city officials alike feared that putting this record on the air would make things worse. The Stones had no plans to pull back. Beggar's Banquet, the album the song appeared on, was one of the defining records of their career. But for Street Fighting Man specifically, the bands ensured it charted significantly lower than almost anything else they released during that period. Number 2. Light My Fire by The Doors. The Doors appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in September 1967, having agreed in advance to change a lyric that referenced getting higher to something the show's producers would approve. The word, in the context of 1967, was universally understood as a reference to drugs, and Sullivan's team had made the change a condition of the booking. Jim Morrison sang the original lyric anyway. He stood at the microphone in front of millions of viewers and did exactly what he had agreed not to do. Ed Sullivan was furious. He told Morrison directly that the band would never appear on his show again. Morrison, by most accounts, was entirely indifferent. The incident cemented the Doors' reputation as genuinely unpredictable, at a time when most acts treated a Sullivan appearance as too commercially valuable to jeopardize. They were never invited back. Number 1. A Day in the Life by the Beatles. The BBC banned this song in May 1967, just days before the release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The corporation's director of sound broadcasting wrote directly to EMI, explaining that the phrase, "I'd love to turn you on," was currently much in vogue in the jargon of the drug addicts, and that the song promoted a permissive attitude towards drug taking. The BBC held firm regardless of what else was on the album or who had made it. The ban remained in place for 5 full years, until 1972, when author David Story chose it as one of his Desert Island discs, and the BBC finally relented. Today, the song is considered one of the greatest recordings in the history of popular music, an extraordinary collaboration between Lennon and McCartney, opening with Lennon's deadpan reading of newspaper headlines about a man who blew his mind out in a car, and closing with a sustained orchestral crescendo unlike anything anyone had put on a pop record before. The Lennon section was inspired partly by the death of Irish socialite Tara Brown in a car crash in 1966. The McCartney section came from an entirely separate fragment about a morning commute. Together, they formed something that sounded unlike anything else on the radio, which is perhaps why the BBC was so determined to keep it off. The BBC banned it for 4 words. History remembered it as something else entirely. Looking back at all of it, what stands out is how often the people doing the banning were the ones who made the songs matter. Every time a record got pulled from the air, every time a broadcaster refused to spin it, they sent a message to the audience that this was something worth hearing, something the people in charge didn't want them to know about. And almost every time, the audience went and found it anyway. That's just how it went in the 1960s. If you made it through all 20, go ahead and leave a like. And if you want more videos like this, subscribe and stick around.